10-Minute Jazz Lesson Podcast, episode 164. Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of the 10-Minute Jazz Lesson Podcast. This is episode 164. Welcome back in, and thank you so much for joining us. My name is Nick Manella. I'm the creator and host of this show, and if you're new, we want to welcome you in. We're very glad you're here, very glad you're starting to take your jazz improvisation journey seriously, and very happy that you've decided to become a student of the music. So before we jump into the show, I wanted to remind you that you can get the PDFs to this episode and every episode that we've ever done on our Patreon site. And you can find that by going to 10minutejazzlesson.com, clicking on one of the Patreon banners, pledging only $3 a month, and you get access to all the materials that we've ever put out, along with a lot of other extras and definitely some benefits coming in the near future to you. So if you've got $3 a month, you like this show, you feel like this stuff will benefit you, then please consider going over to Patreon and donating to us. That makes sure the show keeps coming at you in high quality and also gives you maximum benefit from listening to this show for a low price every month. So I wanted to give a quick shout out to some of our new patrons this week. Thank you to Donald, Alice, and Dan. Thank you guys so much for joining up, becoming part of the Patreon family. We are very happy to have you, and we thank everybody over there that is pledging to us their hard-earned money each and every month. Okay, let's jump into today's episode. Okay, so today is going to be based around another listener submission, and this is something we've done in the past, where we've gone over an assignment that we had from a previous episode on the show, and we kind of critique and rewrite what this student has done. And I think this kind of hands-on approach is really good for everybody out there, just as a way of, rethinking about what you're doing, pointing out some of the core concepts that when you go to come up with your own stuff, sometimes you may forget about. And generally just try to see what I'm thinking when I look at something like this. And this is something I do with a lot of my students in general, is to have them write out stuff because it lets me get into their mind a little bit about what they're thinking and how we can improve that so that our thinking is more in line with some of the concepts that we talk about here. So this week's user submission is from Kris, and I got to give a quick shout out to Kris. Kris is one of the most engaged people on our community Facebook group, the 10-Minute Jazz Lesson community. Kris is always chiming in. He's always thinking about music, and that is going to lead to a lot of improvement for somebody like Kris. So big shout out to Kris, and thank you for your permission for using this on the show. And he told me not to go easy on him, but the stuff that he wrote is really good. It just requires a couple of minor changes. So Kris, I'm not going to go super hard on you, but we are going to revise this piece of vocabulary that you've written and just point out a couple of things that I think could be improved here. So Kris wrote out a bridge on Have You Met Miss Jones? And this stems from an episode that we did. It was episode 159, our Tune of the Month edition on Have You Met Miss Jones? And I talked about sitting down and writing out some bridges to this tune because it is the hardest thing to get through on this particular tune. We've got these really difficult Coltrane cycle changes over the bridge, and this is going to be a little bit of a longer episode, so just be prepared for that because we are going to get into it a little bit. But before we jump into the actual material, I also wanted to point out that Kris is somebody that's actually doing these assignments that I give you. So the difference between getting a lot better really quickly and just kind of floundering for a while before you give up on whatever concept you're working on is actually doing the assignments I give you. So again, kudos to Kris for actually sitting down and doing these assignments. Were there a couple of mistakes? Yeah, of course there were, but that's fine. He actually did it, and now he's reaping the benefits of actually doing this. So that's just another little thing that, practicing and doing these assignments, it actually works. And that is my goal for you. It's not just to listen to the episode, think about it for a little bit. It's to actually do what I tell you to do. All right, let's get into it. So I'm going to play the original bridge that Kris wrote out before I do anything else, just so you can hear it, just so you can kind of wrap your brain around it, and then we are going to tear it apart a little bit, rewrite some of it, and I'm going to explain why I'm rewriting some of it. Okay, so here's Kris's original bridge over the bridge of Have You Met Miss Jones? All right, so let me first start by saying that the rhythm is totally on point, Kris. I did not change the rhythm at all. There was one spot where I changed a note by a half of a beat, but I love the rhythm. So great rhythmic concept in this particular composition here. I love the mix of triplets, all the syncopation, long notes, short notes. Everything about the rhythm, I think, is totally on point. Let's just talk about the notes a little bit. So let's work our way through this bridge here, measure by measure. Now you're going to want to have the PDF in front of you when you listen to this. This is going to be really important so that you can see these little changes that I'm making in Kris's bridge. So let's start in the first measure. So the first measure of the bridge is concert B flat major 7 chord. And Kris has written, he basically goes from the fifth, he jumps up to the root, and then he does this little chromatic thing that goes 6, flat 7, major 7, right? So it sounds like this. Now this is pretty cool, but one thing that we don't like to use on a major 7 chord is actually the dominant 7 at all. If you remember the major bebop scale, the passing tone is between the 6 and the 5. So while it doesn't offend me all that much, I think we might be able to do something a little bit different here. So I kept the first half of the measure. We still start in the fifth, we jump up to the root. But instead of using this 6, flat 7, major 7 thing, I'm just going to use 5, 6, major 7, okay, to play the triplets. So this is what it would sound like. I think that just conveys the sound of a major 7 chord a little bit better than obscuring it a little bit with, that passing tone that just doesn't really work in this situation. So here's Kris's original. And here's mine. I'm just trying to really outline that B flat major 7 chord. I think that's the thing that to really take from this is that I'm really trying to outline that. Okay, so then the next measure is a 2-5 to the key of G flat major, right? So a major third away. That's what makes this so tough. So we've got A flat minor 7 to D flat 7 going to G flat major 7. So what Kris has, and I really, again, really like the rhythm. We're just going to adjust a couple of things here. So he's got the 9 of the A flat major 7 chord, and then he jumps up to the root of D flat, and then over the D flat 7 chord, he does major 7, 5, 1, then down to the 6 of that D flat chord, and then he's jumping down to a G flat. So he has written this line right here. Now again, there's nothing wrong with that line. You hear how it does lead to G flat major 7, and he hits the root right on the G flat major 7, which I really appreciate. So we're going to change this a little bit though. There's just a a couple of notes in this that I would change myself just to make it a little bit more clear. So remember, as these chord changes are moving to these very foreign keys very quickly, I think what we want to do is we want to be as clear as possible. So on beat 3 of this measure, Kris is playing a major 7 on a D flat 7 chord right when that chord first happens, right? So this is something that we want to avoid. The major 7 on a dominant chord is something that we just don't want to play unless we're using it in context of a bebop scale. So unless we're going root, major 7, dominant 7, or the opposite direction, we want to kind of avoid this note. It's just a bad note, and we shouldn't be using it over this chord unless in that one specific situation. So what I did was I changed that major 7 on beat 3 to the dominant 7. So I changed it to a B over D flat, okay? And then in the end of the measure, he jumps from the root to the 6th and then jumps all the way down to the root on the G flat chord. But let's think about how we could make this a little bit more coherent of a line. So instead of jumping from root to 6 to then all the way down to the root on G flat, we're going to now go from the root of the D flat 7 chord on beat 4 to the dominant 7, and then we're going to resolve that to the 3rd of the G flat major chord. Because now what we're doing is we're using good voice leading. We're not jumping away from that last note in the measure. Instead, we're going to move in stepwise motion, and we're going to resolve it to the 3rd because that's the closest note to the note that we came from. So here's Kris's original line over that measure. And here is my revised line over that measure. Now, really the only difference between those two is I removed that major 7, and then I cleaned up the end of the measure, which is the hardest part, really. I think you'll hear at the end of the measure, it just makes a little bit more sense in terms of voice leading. And remember, that's something that we always have to think about when we're playing jazz. Voice leading first. That's what takes all that practice that we're doing. Okay, moving on to the next two measures as a unit, what happens is, we arrive in the key of G flat major, and then the next measure starts at 2/5 to the key of D major. So another major 3rd down here in terms of what keys we're going to. So Kris has this written, and I do like these lines. Again, this was the only rhythm that I changed, and I'm going to tell you why in a second. But here's what Kris wrote over the next two measures, which I definitely dig. So the only thing that bothers me even a little bit about that, again, is the voice leading. So if you look at measure 4, what Kris has done is, he's landed on the 3rd of the E minor chord, and then he's gone down to the 6th on the A7 chord, and then he's jumped all the way down to the root of the D major 7. So I just want to fix that. I think going from an F sharp down to a D doesn't exactly fit our voice leading principles. And again, it's just a little bit of an awkward jump going, a major 3rd. We want to try to get that to like a half step or a whole step. So what I've done in measure 4 of the bridge is instead of playing G, then F sharp, I've reversed it. So I'm going to go G up to G sharp, and then I'm going to resolve that to an A over the D major 7 chord. So I'm working my way up to the 5th of the 1 chord with good voice leading. So again, here's Kris's line. Now all I've done is I've gone and kind of done the opposite. I'm moving up by chromatic note so that I can get to that 5th with good voice leading. Here's my line. So you can hear the voice leading there. It's kind of impossible not to hear it. So again, just a tiny, tiny, tiny little change that I think gives us big results here. Okay, now the rest of the bridge, I honestly didn't really mess with at all because I love the second half of the bridge. I did make a small number of changes. They're very, very minor. I'm going to let you search for those changes and ask yourself why I did them. But let's kind of review this whole thing here and get to the bottom of what I was changing and what you can think about on a bigger level that I think will help you. So on a bridge like this, typically in a tune that's moving by pretty quickly, typically Have You Met Miss Jones is at a medium or up tempo, and the bridge just throws us all these curveballs. It goes from one key to another, to another, to another. And as I said, they're not very related keys. They're following that Coltrane cycle, which is very unrelated keys. So our goal on the bridge and your goal on the bridge should be to play as clearly as possible. So use a lot of chord tones. Make sure that your voice leading from measure to measure is as tight as you can make it. So what you really need to look for is the connections between the keys. What notes lead perfectly into other notes by way of a half step or a whole step and not a jump that I can use. And then base your lines off of that, right? So a lot of chord tones, a lot of those voice leading connection points between when the key changes. That would be the first thing I would think about. And then the second thing that I would think about is don't make it complicated. I think the biggest thing that I hear from students and improvisers of a certain level when they're going to play over something like this is that they just try to do too much. They try to use a lot of the concepts that we teach on this show. They try to, make the seven chords into, diminished dominance or do some cool substitutions. But the problem is, unless you're playing on an extremely high level, it's not going to work over this. Shoot for just playing very, very straightforward material that is going to make your playing as clear as possible. That would be my advice on this. And I think if Kris goes back and rewrites this stuff using some of the concepts that I just mentioned, he's going to find a much clearer course of action over this. And I hope that he writes many more bridges and, submits them to the 10-Minute Jazz Lesson community so that we can kind of see his progress. But again, so much of the material is already there for Kris. Like I said, the rhythmic thing is huge, right? Just the fact that he has such a well-formed rhythmic concept is going to counteract some of these small voice leading things that we fixed in this episode. So that's a major thing, and I wanted to make sure I pointed that out because the rhythmic concept is number one. We talk about that a lot on this show. But you can see the things that we focused on were just like small changes at the end of the measure going into the next measure. And then things like sevenths, like what notes can we use and what notes can't we use. We can never use a major seven over a dominant seven chord unless we're really using it as a passing tone. And just really small things like this. The small stuff makes all the difference at the end of the day. So I'm going to play Kris's original bridge, and then I'm going to play my rewrite of the bridge, and just listen to the difference between them, all right? Check this out. Kris's bridge is first, and then mine is right after that. So there you go. They sound very, very similar, but just some small differences again. So Kris, hopefully that was helpful for you. Hopefully that was helpful for the rest of you out there. The PDF is going to be really valuable on this because then you can compare them, back to back, A and B, and just check out the very, very small differences. Kris, great job. Just the fact that you attempted this is awesome. And then the fact that you did such a really nice job on it is even better. I really hope that this helps. All right. So make sure that you start getting in on some of this stuff. If you want a chance to be featured on the show, get somewhat of a lesson from me, just submit some of your exercises that you've been writing or things that you've been working on to the 10-Minute Jazz Lesson Community Facebook group, and we can do this. I want to do more of this. This is the kind of hands-on work that I really love doing on this show. All right. So again, thanks to Kris. Thanks to all of you out there. Sorry this episode was so long, but sometimes we need to elaborate a little bit. And I know this is called the 10-Minute Jazz Lesson, but I think this might be the longest episode that we've ever done in like 164 episodes. Pretty cool. And, being a teacher of jazz, this is the stuff that really gets my blood flowing, is actually doing like a hands-on example of all of you out there that are trying to benefit from this material. So keep it coming. I love it. All right. Hopefully that opens some doors for you on this particular tune. If you have any questions, let's chat about it in the community Facebook group. I know I keep mentioning that, but that really is the hub for everything that we're doing here. And that's actually where this episode came from. So join up today. Thank you for listening. We hope you have a great weekend. Go get your hands on the PDF, patreon.com/10-minute jazz lesson, or go to 10minutejazzlesson.com, click on one of the Patreon banners, get your hands on this PDF and all the others that we've ever done. Have a great weekend, everybody. We will talk to you soon. Have a good one. Bye.